The Quiet Exodus. The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched out like a metal forest. Tall pillars reached up to a ceiling that glowed with soft blue light. Hundreds of seats filled the curved rows, each one designed for a different species. Some seats held creatures made of crystal. Others had special air tanks for beings that breathed gas instead of oxygen. A few seats were just empty spaces where energy beings floated like colorful clouds. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin sat alone at the human table. His dark suit looked plain next to the bright colors and strange shapes around him. The table had 5 chairs, but he was the only human left. The others had gone home weeks ago when it became clear how this would end. "The motion is before us," announced Speaker Zix Kolani, a tall being whose voice sounded like wind chimes. "Resolution 847C regarding the voluntary relocation of species designation human to designated frontier sectors." Chen kept his face calm, but his hands were folded tight in his lap. Voluntary. That word made him want to laugh, but not in a happy way. There was nothing voluntary about this. Counselor Vorth Ka stood up from the Zalithian section. His crystal body caught the light and threw rainbows across the floor. "The Zalithian Collective has studied this matter with great care. Humans have served an important role in galactic development. Their unique approaches helped us solve the Andromedan crisis 15 years ago." Chen remembered that crisis well. While other species had spent months debating the perfect solution, humans had simply sent ships to rescue the trapped colonists. No committees, no long studies, just action. "However," Vorthka continued, "we have entered a new phase of galactic civilization. We need stability. We need predictable responses to complex problems. The human tendency toward emotional decision-making and unpredictable behavior creates unnecessary risks in our current peaceful era." A murmur went through the chamber. Some species made clicking sounds that meant agreement. Others remained silent. General Crux of the Corvan Empire stood next. His thick gray skin was covered in military medals. "The Corvan Empire agrees with our Zalithian colleagues. Humans fight well when there is war. But now we have peace. Their aggressive nature and their need to always do something instead of think first makes them dangerous to maintain peace." Chen wanted to stand up and remind them who had died holding the line against the Void Swarm. He wanted to ask them who would solve the next crisis they couldn't handle, but he stayed quiet. He had learned that sometimes the best response was no response at all. Ambassador Thesai of the Nethys Collective spoke without standing. Her gas form swirled in colors that showed she was uncomfortable. "The Nethys Collective wishes to express our deep respect for human contributions to galactic society. We have many friendships with individual humans. This decision brings us sadness." At least someone was sad about it, Chen thought. "However," Thesai continued, "we must think of the greater good. The galaxy has grown beyond the need for human unpredictability. We offer them something good in return: 12 systems on the rim, full autonomy, generous trade agreements. They will be comfortable and free. Comfortable and free. Like putting a tiger in a nice zoo cage." Speaker Zix Kalani's voice filled the chamber again. "Does the human representative wish to address the council before we vote?" Chen stood slowly. Every eye, crystal, gas cloud, and energy pattern in the chamber focused on him. He had prepared a speech. He had planned to remind them of every battle humans had fought for them, every problem humans had solved, every life humans had sacrificed for galactic peace. Instead, he said simply, "We understand." The 2 words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Several counselors shifted in their seats. They had prepared for human anger. They had expected shouting and threats and dramatic promises of revenge. They had not expected quiet acceptance. "The human government has already begun preparing. For relocation," Chen continued, "we will leave peacefully. We ask only that you honor the trade agreements you have promised. and that you treat the humans who choose to remain in mixed communities with fairness. More uncomfortable shifting. General Crux actually looked disappointed, as if he had wanted a fight. "Very well," said Speaker Zix Kalani. "We will proceed to vote." The vote was quick. Every species voted yes except the Nethys, who abstained. Chen was not surprised. He had known the outcome before he walked into the chamber. After the session ended, several counselors approached him. They spoke kind words about friendship and understanding. They promised that this was not about hatred or fear, just about practical governance. Chen nodded and smiled and thanked them for their consideration. Ambassador Thasai came last. Her gas form had turned deep blue with sadness. "I am sorry, Chen. Many of us tried to find another way." "I know," Chen said. "You are good people." "This is not personal." "Where will you go first?" she asked. "Home," Chen said, "to tell my people it is time to leave." The exodus began 3 weeks later. On Kepler Station, Dr. Sarah Martinez packed her research notes while her Zalithian colleague, Vex Nathi, watched sadly. They had worked together for 8 years, discovering new ways to communicate across species barriers. "I do not understand why you cannot stay," Vex Nathi said. "You are my friend. Our research is important." Sarah smiled as she sealed another box. "It's not about what I want, Vex. The Council has decided that humans don't fit anymore. Maybe they're right. Maybe we are too unpredictable. But who will solve the problems that logic cannot handle?" Vex Nathi asked. "You'll figure it out," Sarah said. But she didn't sound convinced. On Mars Station, Captain James Liu said goodbye to his mixed crew. He had commanded the ship with beings from 6 different species for 12 years. They had become like family. "This is stupid," growled Korvac 3, his Corvan security chief. "You are the best captain I have served under. Human or not human does not matter." "It matters to the people in charge," Liu said. "Don't worry about me. Take care of the crew." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Humans left their jobs, their homes, their friends. They didn't destroy anything or steal anything or hurt anyone. They just quietly packed their things and left. Some aliens tried to convince their human friends to stay. A few humans did stay, mostly those married to aliens or those who had been adopted into alien families as children. But most humans left. The galaxy watched nervously as transport. Ships carried millions of humans toward the rim worlds. They had expected riots or sabotage or at least some angry protests. Instead, they got polite goodbyes and thank you notes. On the last day, Chen stood in his empty apartment on Earth Station. He had lived there for 20 years. Through the window, he could see Earth hanging in space like a blue marble. Soon, it would belong to someone else. His personal communicator buzzed. It was a message from his daughter on New Terra, one of the rim worlds humans were claiming as their new home. "Dad, we're ready for you here. The first cities are already growing. You should see what we're building. It's going to be amazing." Chen smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe losing the galaxy's approval would teach humanity something they had forgotten. Maybe they could become something better than what they had been when they were trying so hard to fit in. He picked up his last bag and walked toward the transport ship. Behind him, Earth grew smaller in the window. Ahead of him, the unknown waited. For the first time since this all began, Chen felt something that might have been hope. The gathering storm 5 years had passed since the humans left. The galaxy had settled into what the Galactic Council called optimized stability. Trade flowed along predictable routes. Disputes were handled through proper committees. Everything was logical and orderly and peaceful. General Crux stood in the command center of the Corvan battle station, watching reports flow across his screens. 3 separate conflicts had erupted in the past month. Each one should have been simple to resolve. "Status report," he commanded. Captain Thos Meridian stepped forward, her gray skin marked with stress lines. The mining dispute in Sector 7 has escalated, sir. Both sides are now threatening military action. What are their demands? The Altarians claim mining rights based on historical presence. The Centauri Collective claims rights based on technological investment. Both sides have legal documentation supporting their position. Crux growled in frustration. What does the legal committee recommend? They have been debating for 3 weeks, sir. They say more study is needed. 5 years ago, a human mediator would have talked to both sides, found out what they really needed, and worked out a solution in 3 days. Humans had this strange ability to see past what people said they wanted to what they actually needed. Sir, another officer called out, we have a similar problem in Sector 12. The Vegan traders and the Rigel Shipping Guild are blocking each other's routes. Crux closed his eyes. Another problem that should be simple. Another committee that would debate for weeks while the situation got worse. On the research station orbiting Zalithia Prime, Counselor Vorth Ka stared at a problem that made no sense. The quantum computers were giving contradictory answers to the same question. Every logical check showed the system was working perfectly, but the answers were still wrong. Have you tried recalibrating the base parameters? Asked Dr. Kellix Varn, his top researcher. 17 times, Vorth Ka replied. The mathematics are perfect. The logic is flawless, but we cannot solve the power distribution problem for the new colony ships. Dr. Kellix Varn tilted her crystalline head. Perhaps we should approach this from a different angle. We have tried 47 different angles. Logic dictates that one of them should work. What they needed was someone who could look at the problem sideways, someone who could see patterns that logic missed. They needed the kind of intuitive leap that only Vorth Ka stopped himself from finishing that thought. Meanwhile, on the Rim worlds, humanity was building something the galaxy had never seen before. New Terra had grown from a collection of refugee camps to a thriving city that seemed to breathe with life. The buildings curved and flowed like living things, made from materials that repaired themselves and adapted to their environment. Dr. Sarah Martinez, now director of the New Geneva Research Institute, stood in her laboratory watching her latest experiment. She had been working on consciousness transfer technology, but something unexpected had happened. The quantum fields were responding to human thought patterns in ways that shouldn't be possible. Show me the readings again, she said to her assistant. Dr. Kim Nakamura Kim pulled up the holographic display. The test subjects were able to maintain consciousness coherence across quantum barriers for 17 minutes. That's not just impossible according to galactic science. It's impossible according to human science, too. Sarah studied the data. Unless human consciousness works differently than we thought. Different how? What if being emotional and unpredictable isn't a flaw? What if it's an advantage we never knew we had? Similar discoveries were happening across the human Rim worlds. The Tanaka Collective had built ships that seemed to think for themselves, adapting to problems faster than their pilots could react. The new Australian settlements had developed communication networks that worked instantly across impossible distances. None of these breakthroughs made sense according to established science, but they worked. On Luna Station, former Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin, now serving as Director of Human Affairs, received a coded message from an old friend. Ambassador Thesai of the Nethys Collective was requesting an unofficial meeting. They met in a small cafe on Titan Station, neutral territory between human and galactic space. Thesai's gas form had turned pale yellow with worry. The galaxy is not doing well without you, she said without preamble. Chen sipped his coffee, a luxury that cost a fortune this far from human space. We noticed. The Corvin military cannot handle disputes that require understanding instead of force. The Zalithian logic systems fail when problems require creative solutions. The Altarian peacekeepers do not know how to prevent conflicts before they start. These are not human problems anymore, Chen said gently, but they could become human problems if they spread far enough. Desai pointed out. Chaos in the core worlds affects everyone. Chen nodded. He had been watching the reports. Trade disruptions were already affecting the Rim worlds. If the situation got worse, it could threaten the fragile peace humanity was building for itself. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "Advice. Consultation. Perhaps some human mediators could work with our committees. We were told we were too unpredictable for the new galactic order." The Psi's colors shifted to deep blue. "Many of us said things we regret. Pride made us forget how much we depended on human intuition and creativity." Chen studied his old friend. "I'll discuss it with the Council of Worlds, but I cannot promise anything. Humans are different now. 5 years of independence have changed us." "Different how?" Chen smiled, but it was not entirely a happy expression. "We've learned we don't need your approval to be who we are. That changes everything." Back on New Terra, President Maria Santos received Chen's report in her office overlooking the city. Through the windows, she could see children playing in parks where gravity shifted gently to let them fly. Artists were creating sculptures that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Musicians played instruments that made sounds with colors and lights. Her aide, Dr. James Liu, former ship captain turned civilian administrator, read the report over her shoulder. "They want our help," he said. "They want us to fix their problems," Maria corrected. "There's a difference. Should we help them?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. "The question isn't whether we should help them. The question is whether we can help them without losing what we've become." Outside her window, a group of teenagers was practicing something that looked like combat, but moved like dance. They were learning to exist partially outside normal space, slipping between dimensions the way their ancestors had once slipped between buildings in a city. These children had been born in exile. They had grown up free from the need to prove themselves to anyone but themselves. They were becoming something new. "Send a message to the Galactic Council," Maria decided. "Tell them we're aware of their situation and we're considering our options." The same words Chen had used 5 years ago when they were the ones being politely dismissed. Dr. Liu raised an eyebrow. "That's all?" "For now," Maria said. "Let them think about what it means to need something from someone they cast aside. Let them remember that humans don't forget. We don't forgive quickly, and we definitely don't come running just because they whistle." The message was sent through official channels within hours. It was only 2 sentences long, but it traveled through the galaxy faster than light, discussed in every government building and military command center from the core worlds to the outer rim. Humanity was no longer asking for a place at the galactic table. The galaxy was starting to realize it might need to ask for a place at the human one, when solutions are needed. The first signs appeared on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. Long-range sensors in the Vega system detected something impossible. 3 planets had simply vanished from their orbits, leaving behind empty space. That bent light in strange ways. Admiral Corvin Prime received the report in his flagship command center. He read it twice, then ordered the sensors recalibrated. The report came back the same. "Send a scout ship," he ordered. "I want visual confirmation." The scout ship never returned. Its last transmission was a confused message about space that looked inside out and stars that sang in colors. Within days, similar reports came from across the galaxy. Entire systems were disappearing but not destroyed. They were being transformed into spaces that existed between normal dimensions. The Void Swarm had returned, but not as the mindless destroyers they had been before. In the Galactic Council chambers, panic replaced the usual calm debates. Speaker Zix Kalani's voice cracked with stress as he called for emergency sessions day after day. "The situation grows worse," announced Dr. Quelzani, the galaxy's top physicist. "We are not dealing with invasion or destruction. The void entities are restructuring reality itself. They are moving entire systems into pocket dimensions that overlap with our space, but exist according to different physical laws. General Crux stood at attention, but his usual confidence was gone. The Corvan fleet has engaged the entities in 17 separate battles. Our weapons have no effect. The enemy exists in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Our targeting systems cannot lock onto targets that exist in spaces we cannot perceive. Counselor Vorth-Ka's crystal body had lost its usual bright glow. Zilithian logic matrices have analyzed 847 possible solutions. All calculations result in failure. The entities operate on principles that contradict the basic laws of physics as we understand them. "What about evacuation?" asked Ambassador Thasai, her gas form swirling with fear. "Evacuation to where?" Dr. Quelzani replied. "The pocket. Dimensions are spreading. At current rates, the entire galaxy will be affected within 2 years." Young Counselor Vex Nathi, now a senior researcher, spoke up from the Zilithian section. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent chamber everyone heard her clearly. "Perhaps we should consult the humans." The suggestion hung in, the air like a toxic cloud. No one wanted to be the first to respond. These were the same beings who had voted to exile humanity 5 years ago. These were the species who had declared humans too unpredictable for galactic civilization. General Crux's gray skin darkened with embarrassment. The humans were relocated because they could not adapt to peaceful governance. How would they handle a crisis that has defeated our best military minds? They handled the last Void Swarm crisis, Vex Nathi pointed out quietly. "That was different," Crux protested. "That was simple warfare. This is something else entirely." Ambassador Thasai shifted to pale blue, the color of sad truth. "Perhaps that is exactly why we need them. Our logic fails because this situation is not logical. Our military force fails because this is not really a war. Our science fails because this goes beyond science as we know it." Speaker Zix Kolani made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. The humans were offered generous relocation packages. They accepted. They are no longer part of galactic civilization. We cannot simply call upon them when we need them. "Why not?" Vex Nathi asked. "We called upon them before. They always answered." The chamber fell silent again. Everyone remembered the Andromedan crisis when human ships had arrived within hours of the distress call. They remembered the plague wars when human doctors had worked around the clock to save alien children they had never met. They remembered 100 smaller crises where humans had simply showed up and helped, asking for nothing in return except the chance to be useful. "The political complications would be enormous," protested Counselor Hesnakari of the Rigelian Assembly. "How do we explain to our people that we need the help of the species we exiled for being too primitive? How do we explain to our people that we let the galaxy end because we were too proud to ask for help?" Thasai countered. The debate continued for hours, but everyone knew how it would end. When your house is burning, you don't refuse help from the neighbor you argued with last year. On New Terra, Admiral James Harrison received the first unofficial communication 3 days later. It came through back channels, routed through traders and merchants and old friends who still maintained contact across the exile boundary. The message was simple. The galaxy faces extinction. Traditional solutions have failed. Would humanity be willing to provide consultation? Harrison sat in his office, looking out over the city that had grown from refugee camps into something magnificent. His aide, Commander Sarah Chen, no relation to the former ambassador, waited for his response. "What do you think?" he asked her. "I think they're scared," Sarah said. "I think they've tried everything they know how to try, and it hasn't worked. And I think they're finally realizing that maybe being unpredictable isn't always a weakness." Harrison nodded slowly. "Draft a response. Keep it simple." The message that went back was even shorter than the one they had received. "We are aware of your situation. We are considering our options. Within hours, that message was being analyzed by every intelligence agency in the galaxy. Linguists studied the word choice. Psychologists debated the implications of the phrasing. Military analysts tried to determine if it contained hidden threats. They were missing the point entirely. The humans weren't playing word games or making threats. They were simply doing what they always did when asked for help. They were figuring out how to help. In research facilities across the human rim worlds, scientists were already working on the problem. Dr. Sarah Martinez had teams analyzing the quantum signatures of the disappearing systems. The Tanaka Collective was building new types of sensors that could detect dimensional shifts. Engineers on Luna Station were designing ships that could exist partially outside normal space. The humans had been watching the crisis develop for weeks. They had been preparing solutions while the Galactic Council was still debating whether to admit they had a problem. President Maria Santos called a meeting of the Human Council of Worlds. Representatives from all 12 rim systems gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on New Terra. The room was smaller than the Galactic Council chambers, but it felt warmer, more alive. "The galaxy that exiled us is asking for our help," Maria announced, without preamble. "The question before us is not whether we can help them. The question is whether we will help them." The debate that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened in the old Galactic Council. There were no formal procedures, no committee reviews, no extended logical analyses. Humans spoke from the heart about duty and responsibility and what it meant to be human. Some argued for letting the galaxy face the consequences of their decision to exile humanity. Others insisted that humans helped people because it was the right thing to do, not because those people deserved it. In the end, the decision was unanimous, reached not through voting, but through the kind of instinctive consensus that had always made other species uncomfortable with human unpredictability. They would help. Not because the galaxy deserved it, but because people were dying and humans knew how to save them. The response they sent to the Galactic Council was longer this time, but still simple. "We will help. Send a delegation to New Terra. Come ready to listen." Within days, the fastest ships in the galaxy were racing toward the rim worlds, carrying the most powerful beings in galactic civilization to ask for help from the species they had cast aside. This galaxy that had once dismissed human unpredictability was about to discover what humans could accomplish when they stopped trying to fit in and started being themselves. The price of pride, the delegation ship approached New Terra with all the ceremony the galaxy could manage. The vessel carried representatives from every major species. General Crux himself led the Corvan contingent. Councillor Vorth Ka represented. The Zilithians and Ambassador Thesai spoke for the Nethys Collective. Even the energy beings of the Altarian Assembly had sent an avatar. As their ship entered New Terra's orbital space, the delegates pressed against the viewports to see what humanity had built in 5 years of exile. What they saw made them quiet. New Terra didn't look like the frontier colony worlds they had expected. The cities flowed across the landscape like living rivers of light and metal. Spaceports floated in the atmosphere, connected to the ground by streams of energy that carried cargo and people up and down like gentle waterfalls. Ships moved between the orbital stations in patterns that looked more like dancing than traffic control. "How is this possible?" Dr. Quelzani whispered, his scientific instruments registering energy readings that made no sense. The infrastructure requirements alone should have taken decades to build. General Crux watched a group of construction ships working on a new station. The ships were moving in perfect coordination without any visible command structure. "They have no military hierarchy," he muttered. "How do they coordinate large operations without proper command chains?" Councillor Vorth Ka's crystal body was shifting colors rapidly as he tried to process what he was seeing. The mathematical probabilities for this level of civilization development in 5 years are impossible. Ambassador Thesai said nothing. but her gas form had turned deep purple with a mixture of shame and amazement. The delegation was met at the main spaceport by President Maria Santos. She looked older than her years, but carried herself with quiet confidence. Behind her stood a small group of humans, including Admiral Harrison and Dr. Martinez. No honor guards, no ceremonial displays, no complex protocols, just people waiting to help. "Welcome to New Terra," President Santos said simply. "We're glad you could come." The formal greetings were awkward. How do you shake hands with someone you once considered beneath you? How do you make polite conversation with people you exiled from their homes? President Santos seemed to understand the discomfort. "Let's skip the diplomacy," she said with a slight smile. "You didn't come here for pleasantries. You came because your people are dying and you don't know how to save them." General Crux stiffened at her bluntness, but Councillor Vorth-Ka stepped forward. "That is accurate," he admitted. "We have exhausted our conventional approaches. The void entities operate outside our understanding of physics." "Come," President Santos said. "Let me show you what we've learned." They were taken to the New Geneva Research Institute, where Dr. Martinez waited with her team. The building itself was impossible by galactic architectural standards. Walls curved in directions that hurt to look at, and some rooms seemed larger on the inside than on the outside. "We've been studying the void phenomenon for 3 months, Dr. Martinez explained, leading them to a laboratory that existed partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. The entities aren't invading your dimension. They're trying to communicate with it." "Communicate?" General Crux scoffed. "They're destroying entire systems." "They're translating entire systems," Dr. Martinez corrected, "moving them into dimensional spaces where communication is possible. The problem is that most consciousness types can't survive the translation process." She gestured to a holographic display that showed swirling patterns of energy. "But human consciousness is different. We're naturally unstable, mentally speaking. Our emotions and intuition and unpredictable thought patterns make us naturally quantum coherent." Councillor Vorth-Ka studied the display with growing excitement. "You mean human irrationality is actually a form of dimensional awareness?" "Exactly," Dr. Martinez smiled. "What you called unpredictable, we call adaptable. What you called chaotic, we call multidimensional thinking." She led them to another room where a human technician sat in a chair surrounded by strange equipment. Her eyes were closed and her body was perfectly still, but the monitors around her showed brain activity unlike anything the delegates had ever seen. "Sarah is currently maintaining consciousness in 4 dimensions simultaneously," Dr. Martinez explained. "She's communicating with a void entity that's trapped in dimensional flux near the Centauri system." The technician's eyes opened, and she smiled at the watching delegates. "Hello," she said. "The entity says hello, too. It's been trying to say hello for months, but none of your people could hear it." General Crux's gray skin had gone pale. "She's talking to them?" "We all are," President Santos said. "Every human who's undergone phase training can slip between dimensions. We can exist partially outside normal spacetime. It's not comfortable, and it's not easy, but we can do it." Admiral Harrison stepped forward. "The question is whether you want us to do it for you." The delegation exchanged glances. This was not what they had expected. They had come prepared to beg for human assistance, maybe offer generous compensation for human help. They had not come prepared to discover that humanity had evolved beyond their understanding. "What do you want in return?" Councillor Vorth-Ka asked carefully. President Santos was quiet for a long moment. "Nothing," she said finally. "Nothing?" General Crux couldn't hide his suspicion. "You want no territory? No compensation? No political concessions?" "We want nothing," President Santos repeated. "We help because that's who we are. That's who we've always been." Ambassador Thesay's colors shifted to deep blue shame. "Even after what we did to you?" "Especially after what you did to us," President Santos said gently. You taught us that we don't need your approval to be valuable. You taught us that being different isn't the same as being wrong. You gave us the gift of independence, even if you didn't mean to. Dr. Martinez activated another display showing the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked the areas affected by dimensional shifts. The pattern was spreading faster than anyone had realized. The situation is worse than your reports indicated, she said. The entities aren't just moving individual systems. They're trying to translate the entire galaxy into a space where all forms of consciousness can communicate directly. That's impossible, Dr. Quelzani protested. The energy requirements alone would require a power source that exists outside normal space-time, Dr. Martinez finished, which is exactly what they're using. The good news is that we can talk to them. The bad news is that the translation process will kill most galactic life forms. But not humans, Admiral Harrison added. Not humans, President Santos agreed. We can survive the transition. We can help others survive it too if we work together. The delegation realized they were not just asking for human help with a crisis. They were asking humans to save galactic civilization from a transformation that only humans could survive. General Crux looked around the impossible building, at the humans who could exist in multiple dimensions, at the technology that worked, according to principles his people couldn't understand. What have you become? He asked quietly. President Santos smiled, and for the first time since their arrival, it was completely genuine. We've become ourselves, she said. Finally and completely. Ourselves. The question is whether that's something you can accept. The delegation spent 3 days on New Terra, seeing impossible things and learning truths that challenged everything they thought they knew about consciousness, reality, and what it meant to be alive in a universe that was stranger than anyone had imagined. When they left to return to the core worlds, they carried with them an offer that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity would save them all, asking nothing in return except the chance to be who they had always been meant to be. The galaxy that had once found human unpredictability inconvenient was about to discover that human unpredictability might be the only thing that could save them from a universe that was far more unpredictable than any human had ever been. What remains? The solution began with volunteers. Across the human rim worlds, people stepped forward to undergo phase training. Not soldiers or specialists, but ordinary humans who were willing to risk their sanity to save people who had exiled them. Teachers and farmers, artists and engineers, children barely old enough to understand what they were volunteering for. Captain Lisa Chen, distant cousin to the former ambassador, was among the first phase pilots. She had been a cargo hauler before the exile, moving freight between stations and planets. Now she sat in a specially designed ship that existed partially outside normal space, her consciousness stretched across 7 dimensions simultaneously. Contact. Established with entity group Sigma-7, she reported through communication equipment that shouldn't have worked. They're asking why the rigid thinking ones are afraid of translation. Dr. Martinez, monitoring from the command station, spoke into her headset. Tell them the rigid thinking ones will die if they're translated. Tell them we need a different solution. The conversation that followed took 3 hours and happened in a space between spaces where time moved differently. Lisa later described, "It is trying to explain color to someone who had never seen light, while both of them were falling through a waterfall made of music." The breakthrough came when Lisa realized the entities weren't trying to invade or conquer. They were trying to save galactic civilization from something worse. They call it the silent dark, Lisa reported, her voice strained from the effort of maintaining consciousness in multiple dimensions. It's coming from outside our galaxy. It destroys not just matter and energy, but the possibility of existence itself. The void entities are trying to move everyone to a safe space before it arrives. The silent dark would reach the galaxy in 18 months. The void entities had been trying to evacuate everyone, but their form of communication was deadly to most species. They had been destroying systems not out of malice, but out of desperate urgency. Dr. Martinez immediately understood the implications. They need translators, beings who can exist in both spaces and help with the evacuation. How? Many translators do we need? Asked Admiral Harrison. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, consulting with entities that existed as pure thought in spaces that had no names. All of them, she finally said. We need every human who can phase. The evacuation began immediately. Human phase pilots worked around the clock, translating not just information but entire populations into dimensional spaces where they could survive what was coming. It was exhausting, dangerous work. Some pilots lost themselves between dimensions and had to be rescued by others. Some came back changed. Their consciousness expanded in ways that would take years to understand. But they kept working. The galaxy watched in amazement as humans accomplished what seemed impossible. Species that had been fighting for generations worked together when human mediators helped them understand they were all facing extinction. Technologies that had been considered theoretical became reality under human guidance. Entire civilizations were moved to safety by people who had once been considered too primitive for galactic society. 6 months into the evacuation, the Galactic Council held an emergency session. But this time, it wasn't in the great chambers on Galactic Prime. The chambers were in a dimensional pocket created by human phase technology, and humans sat at the table as equal partners. President Santos addressed the assembly, but she looked tired. Leading the greatest evacuation in galactic history was taking its toll on humanity. The evacuation is proceeding faster than we hoped, she reported. We've successfully translated 47 systems to safe dimensional space. The entities are teaching us to create stable pocket universes that can sustain galactic civilization indefinitely. General Crux, who had been working closely with human military advisors, stood to address the assembly. I owe humanity an apology, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation fields. We called you unpredictable when we should have called you adaptable. We called you chaotic when we should have called you creative. We exiled you for being different when your differences were exactly what the galaxy needed. A murmur of agreement ran through the assembly. Similar statements came from every major species representative. Speaker Zixkalani raised the question everyone was thinking. When this crisis ends, what happens next? What does the galaxy look like when we're all living in dimensional spaces, created and maintained by human technology? President Santos was quiet for a long moment. That depends on what you want, she said finally. The old galaxy is ending whether we save everyone or not. The silent dark will consume everything we left behind. We can build something new in the spaces we're creating, but it will have to be something different. Different how? Asked Councillor Vorthkaw. Equal, President Santos said simply. No more species thinking they're better than others. No more exiling people for being different. No more pretending that logic is always better than intuition, or that military force is always better than understanding. The debate that followed was unlike any the Galactic Council had ever held. Instead of formal procedures and committee reports, species shared their fears and hopes directly. Humans helped translate not just languages, but emotions and concepts that had never been shared across species lines. In the end, they created something unprecedented, a truly unified galactic civilization based not on dominance or hierarchy, but on the recognition that every form of consciousness brought something valuable to the whole. The evacuation took 14 months to complete. When the silent dark finally reached their original galaxy, there was nothing left to consume but empty space and abandoned stars. Every living being, every work of art, every important idea had been safely moved to the new dimensional spaces. Humanity had saved galactic civilization, but the cost had been enormous. The constant phase work had changed them. Many humans could no longer exist fully in normal space. Children born during the evacuation were something new, naturally multidimensional beings who could think and exist in ways their parents could barely understand. 2 years after the evacuation ended, former Ambassador Chen Wei-lin stood in his new office on New Galactic Prime, the impossible city that served as the capital of their dimensional civilization. Through his window, he could see the impossible. Multiple star systems sharing the same sky, each one existing in a slightly different dimensional space, but visible from all the others. A young Corvan officer had come to see him. She was part of the new generation that had grown up working alongside humans, and she had a question that the older generation was still struggling with. "Director Chen," she said, "my teacher says that humans saved us all, but humans say they were just doing what anyone would do." "Which is true." Chen smiled. It was the same question he had been asking himself for months. "Both," he said finally. "Humans did save galactic civilization. That's just fact. But humans did it because that's who they are. They help people. They solve problems. They adapt to impossible situations and find ways to make them work." "But why?" the young officer pressed. "What do humans get out of helping everyone else?" Chen looked out his window again, watching human children playing with alien children in a park that existed in 5 dimensions simultaneously. The children were learning together, growing together, becoming something new together. "They get to be themselves," he said. "For the first time in galactic history, humans get to be completely, unapologetically themselves. And it turns out that when humans are allowed to be themselves, everyone benefits." The young officer nodded thoughtfully and left to write her report for the new Galactic Studies program, where all species learned about each other's strengths and contributions. Chen stayed at his window, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The galaxy had tried to exile humanity for being too different. In response, humanity had saved everyone while becoming more different than anyone had imagined possible, and somehow that had made everything work better than it ever had before. In the end, the galaxy hadn't learned to accept human unpredictability. The galaxy had learned that unpredictability wasn't a flaw to be tolerated, but a gift to be treasured. The universe was vast and strange and full of surprises, and it turned out that the best way to survive in such a universe was to be just as unpredictable, just as adaptable, and just as willing to help others as the humans had always been. The new galactic civilization thrived in its impossible dimensional spaces, powered by human technology but guided by the combined wisdom of all species working together as equals. And at the heart of it all were the humans who had never stopped being exactly who they were, even when the galaxy told them they should be someone else. They had let humans leave quietly, with no flames and no blame. What remained was a galaxy that finally understood what it had almost lost, and a humanity that had found itself by saving everyone else.